My name's David Eagle, Principal Consultant from OneSpatial, and this is a presentation to give you some helpful facts about licensing the FME product. I'll go through a number of things, including the different products that are available and the editions, the installation of FME, and the different types of license, whether it's a fixed or a floating license, and some of the resources you can use to help you out when you're working and setting up your initial installations of the products. So, the main products that are available, FME Desktop and FME Server. FME Desktop is available to be licensed with a floating license model. That's sometimes referred to as node locked. You might hear it called that. There's also something called a floating license, and that's also available for FME Desktop. Occasionally that's referred to as a concurrent license because it means that you can have more than one individual using FME at any one time. So those licenses are concurrent. The FME Server product is a slightly different proposition to Desktop. It means essentially that you can get the use of FME through a web page, and you can provide access to FME to individuals who don't necessarily have to know how to use FME but can operate a web page in order to perhaps download some spatial data from a web service that you've set up. Now, FME Server is only available to be licensed using a floating license model, so that's something to remember when you come to plan your infrastructure. There's also a third proposition, and that's FME Cloud. It's at the current time, which is March 2013, not quite in beta yet, but it's certainly something to watch out for because that will provide an all-new way of licensing the FME product. When you talk about FME Desktop, there is something called an edition. This often has a little bit of confusion surrounding it. Essentially what it means is that as you go down the stack of editions that are available from Base through Professional, through the Esri and Intergraph tier, through the Oracle, SQL Server and IBM tier, through to Small World, as you go through that stack, two things happen. One is that you get the ability to write more data formats, so specifically writing data formats. So an example there is that with FME Professional, you can read data out of a MapInfo tab file, but you can't write it into a Oracle spatial database. If you wanted to write that data into an Oracle spatial database or into SQL Server spatial, you would need to purchase the database tier. So as you go through the stack, the second thing that happens is that you pay a little bit more for each of the editions through from top to bottom. Now this second, third and fourth tiers are referred to as respectively the FME Enterprise Edition and the Database Edition. Essentially it's a little bit of a marketing term. When you purchase your FME edition, you might buy the FME Esri edition or the FME Intergraph edition. Essentially they are the same thing, they're the Enterprise edition, and it means that when you buy the Esri edition, for example, you can write some of the more involved Esri formats, such as working with the SDE database extension from Esri. Now, editions are not relevant to FME Server. Basically, the two products, FME Desktop and FME Server, operate as a server and client pair. So, if you buy FME Desktop, when you decide that your organization needs FME Server, you still need to retain at least one license to FME Desktop, because FME Desktop is the authoring environment where you write the processing scripts that you can then publish to FME Server. Now, if you can write a script that gives you the ability to write into an Oracle database in Desktop, when you publish that process to Server, Server can do exactly the same things as Desktop can do. So it's not too complicated, but it does need to be understood a little around that topic. But for any further clarification, please go to safe.com/formats, and on that web page you'll see that quite easily you can sort by the different version of operating system that you have or platform, and you can take a look at the different platforms and the formats that are supported between the different environments. So you can see here that FME server is included here to indicate what formats are available. So installing FME, it's the same installer. It doesn't matter what edition that you've bought. You install or download the same installer from safe.com/downloads. The license itself, the license file that you get issued, is the file that unlocks the edition that you've bought. The only thing to be aware of is that if you want to use the 64-bit FME, then that is a separate installer. It's not always the best approach. It's a bit of a more detailed conversation or another presentation to go into the pros and cons of 32-bit versus 64-bit, but certainly there's a very useful page on FMEpedia. If you search for 32-bit versus 64-bit on that page on FMEpedia, then you'll find a very useful article that gives you the pros and cons of the 2-bit versions. So FME Desktop's fixed licenses is a very useful license model if you want or an individual needs dedicated access to FME. The license file will be provided to you. It'll basically be called something.fmelic. That file extension tells you that it's a fixed license. To generate that license, we already know what your serial number is, but we will need your registration key. So the first thing you need to do is install FME Desktop and then fire up the license wizard. In the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see there's a registration key, and we need that number. It will be specific and only valid to your machine, if anything happens to your machine, if you have some new RAM or a new hard drive, it's likely that that number will change. So we're happy to reissue your license in that case, or if in fact you want to move that license across to another machine. Moving to floating licenses, they're quite useful if you have several people who want to have regular access to FME, or perhaps you want corporate installations, so you have lots of installations of FME, and you want to be able to serve one or many licenses across your network to all the individual users who need access to that. When we provide you with a license file, it'll be called safe.lic or something.lic. That LIC file extension indicates that it's a floating license file that you've been given. And it gives you the ability to serve your licenses potentially to many machines. But you do need to install a little license server utility with a floating license. So that's available from safe.com/downloads. You can go and get that license server utility. Install it in under a minute, and that can host your license file and serve out your license seats. To create the license file, we need to understand the server name and the MAC address of the license server machine. One of the other beauties of the floating license platform is that it does allow users to borrow a license from the server, essentially turning them into local fixed licenses for up to 30 days. So if you have a user that needs to work on the local network and wants to borrow a license, they can borrow that, and then they can disconnect their machine from the local network if it's a laptop, go out onto a customer site, or go and use it at a different environment, taking the license with them. And when their duration, their period of time that they borrow it from expires, then the license will automatically return. You'll see that in FME Workbench you can license or borrow a license using directly from the interface there. Specify the number of days you want to borrow it for, click OK, and it will essentially borrow the license from the server, meaning that there is one fewer license available to everybody else, but you do have a fixed license for that period of time. The other thing to bear in mind with the floating license platform is that it can, after a certain amount of licenses, become more economic to work and to purchase additional floating licenses. So that's something to bear in mind when you're working or requiring perhaps 3 or more licenses in your organisation. Once invested in the floating license platform, though, it's very quick to deploy FME. Essentially, all we need to do is upgrade your license file, and all of a sudden you'll have another 1 or more licenses available to your users. The other thing to bear in mind is, as I mentioned, FME servers engines are only licensed with the floating license platform. Desktop and server licenses can be served from the same license file if needed. And the other thing to bear in mind is that if you're a larger organization and you want to avoid a single point of failure and essentially have a failover environment on the license server, you can do that with the floating license. It does mean that you have to dedicate 3 servers, and only 3, to serve your licenses, and essentially for no extra cost you can have your license server utility installed on each of those server machines, and they can broadcast. The first will broadcast the license. Should there be a failure on this machine over here, essentially it knows that there's a second one available and it hands the baton to the second machine. That can continue to serve your license files out to your users, meaning that they experience no downtime. If there is a problem with the second machine, then the third machine can kick in and also supply the licenses out to your users. It's unlikely that that would happen, but perhaps there might be a failure that is specific to those machines. If the third one does have a problem with it, that's as many goes as you get, essentially. Unfortunately, that will mean that your users don't get a license. But it's likely that probably when the second license server kicked in, you would have known about it and been able to resolve the issue and make sure that there's no further outage. That's it from me really for this session. The only thing I wanted to say is that there are a few very useful resources to go and take a look at. The FMEpedia documentation page is definitely worth going to. You'll notice that on here under knowledge documentation there's a number of documents to download and get stuck into. The FME Getting Started guide is very useful and allows you to get started with your new purchases very quickly. And the FME licensing and installation manual is very useful. It's available as a PDF or online to help you find out and work with the initial setup and the different types of troubleshooting that you might have to do when you're initially setting up your licenses. There are also some dedicated pages to take a look at when it comes to troubleshooting. So just go to FMEpedia and search for either fixed license or floating license troubleshooting on FMEpedia, and you'll see that there are a number of options to go through and try and find out what the problem might be when you're setting up your license. That said, usually it's pretty much plain sailing, but there are some different environments that can mean you need to reference some further documentation, and they're the best places to go. For now, thank you very much. As I said, my name's David Eagle, and I work for One Spatial, and hopefully this session has been useful to you.